Hello, Gavin McCormack here from Upschool. Welcome to week number 2 of this course, The History of Language, where we are going to take you on a journey through time to learn about language and particularly idioms. Idioms are phrases that we use that allow us to describe how we feel or something that's happening in our lives, and they have been around for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. This week, we're taking you back 200 to 300 years ago, back to old London town. Yes, we're going into the 1700s in England. The capital city of England is London. Now, London in the 1700s was a very interesting place. Today it's filled with skyscrapers and buildings and fancy roads and technology everywhere. But in the 1700s, London was very different indeed. There was no electricity at this point. It had not been invented. In fact, it was in the late 1700s when electricity came around. So people in their houses would light fires to warm up their house, which meant that if everybody in London was burning wood to keep their houses warm, it was, yes, very cozy around the fire, but out in the streets there was lots of smoke, lots of smog, and lots of pollution. So people found it very, very hard to breathe. Number 2, there was no electricity in the houses. So when people wanted to put on the light when it came dark, they would have to light a candle to keep the house light so they could see exactly where they were going. It was a very mysterious and romantic time in history because this wonderful soft light illuminated the streets and illuminated everyone's houses. But out in the street, things were very different. You see, there was no sewage. There was no sewers under the ground. So when you had rubbish or garbage, you would simply toss it into the road. Or worse, you would toss it into the river, which means the streets were littered with garbage, rubbish, sometimes rotting food, and even, yes, in disgusting ways, horse manure or horse poo. It was all over the place, which meant there were flies and there was disease. So it's very common that you would get sick. And because the rivers were polluted too, it was very hard to find fresh water. So being a human in the 1700s was not as easy as it is today. Number 2, if you were a child living in the 1700s, well, school was something you might be able to get your hands on. But it wasn't like the school that we have today. Today we go to our classrooms, we sit inside, we listen to our teachers and talk to our friends. But in the 1700s, in order to get educated, you would have to have, you guessed it, money. And you wouldn't go to a building or to a school, the school would come to you. If you had money, a tutor would turn up at your house and educate you, prepare you for the future. But if you did not have money, if you were unfortunate, you would have to work. And that meant being a servant for a noble person. It meant working for your family, selling at the markets, or working on the farm. And it was hard work. 1700s was not an easy time to be around. Now, sometimes people wanted a bit of a rest, a bit of something to entertain themselves and have a bit of fun during these hard times. So they would go into a theatre to watch a play. There was no cinemas at that time. There was no movies or televisions or Netflix. So if you wanted to be entertained, you would go to a theatre and you would watch a show. Now, this week's idiom comes from inside one of those theatres in the 1700s. Here goes the story. There was a man called John Dennis. John Dennis was a wonderful man who wanted to write a play to entertain the people of London, but he wanted to do something very special, something that nobody else had ever done before. He wanted to bring sound effects into his play. You see, the only sound effect we had until this time were human voices, but he had come up with an amazing invention. He'd found a piece of old metal, and behind the curtain, as he was doing his play and saying the parts, he would speak about this great thunderstorm that appeared. Somebody behind the curtain would shake the piece of metal very, very violently indeed, and it would make a noise just like the sound of thunder. And he thought that this was going to bring their house down. People were going to hear their first ever sound effect. and they were going to be really, really impressed. So for a few weeks before his play, he practiced behind the curtain and rehearsed. And on the grand night, on the premiere, the night when his play was opening, he walked into the theatre expecting to see a full crowd of people wanting to see his show, but guess what? A problem. The theatre was completely empty. Only 2 or 3 people were sitting in the audience. John Dennis did not want to let them down, so he put on the play, he did the whole show, and he left for the evening, hoping that tomorrow there would be a full audience. Now something terrible happened. The next day he received a communication that said, "Look, John, I'm so sorry, but your play has been completely cancelled. It is a flop. You can no longer show it in our theatres." Now John was really upset. He'd put his heart into this, and especially his new invention, the piece of metal that he shook to make the sound of thunder. It was supposed to be revolutionary. So, to drown his sorrows and make himself feel happier, the next night he went to a show himself. He sat in the audience and he watched the play taking place. But that is where something absolutely crazy happened. In the middle of the play that he was watching, there was a line about thunder, and he heard the very noise that he had invented. That's right. Somebody had been spying on him while he rehearsed his own play, and they had stolen his invention. The audience was so happy they all stood up, round of applause. They were all up in arms about this amazing sound that they'd never heard before. But John was not happy at all. When the crowd sat down, he stood up and shouted with the loudest voice ever, "You may have cancelled my play, but you will never steal my thunder." And that was the moment that the idiom was invented, to steal somebody's thunder. It's a saying and a phrase we use all the time. "Don't you dare steal my thunder. I can't believe he stole my thunder." And this saying means that someone has taken your idea, taken your limelight and your fame, and stolen it for themselves. And we use it every single day. It's in the newspapers, it's in movies, and we say it when we're speaking to our friends. Now we know where it came from. Around about 250 years ago to 300 years ago, John Dennis invented this saying because somebody stole his invention of creating the sound effect of thunder using a piece of metal. What an amazing story. I can't believe we still say it today after all of these years, but many of us do not know where it came from, but you do. Now this week we want you to first of all get this story and tell it to somebody else. Share this story with your grandma, with your grandfather, with your mum, your dad, your brother, your sister, your friends, and inspire them to be excited about the world of language and literacy. Number 2, we're going to ask you to choose your very own idiom. And we've given you 100 idioms to choose from different times in history, and you can choose one that you feel excited about. And then we want you to conduct your research on the idiom, on its meaning, but also take a journey through history and find out what was life like in the world and in the place where that idiom was created. It's been amazing to have you here in week number 2 of this course, and I literally cannot wait to see you in week number 3. And remember, do not steal anyone's thunder this week. Goodbye.